you lost in the chaotic whirlwind of day-to-day busyness? Do you yearn for a deeper sense of meaning and purpose in your life? Welcome to Be You, Your Story, Your Purpose, the podcast dedicated to empowering women on their journey of self-discovery and finding their true purpose through their own story. I'm your host, Brenda Simmons. Welcome to the Be You, Your Story, Your Purpose podcast. Today, my guest is Melissa Bickford, and she is an executive in the software industry, and she's going to tell us a little bit about that, as well as some of the other things that she has experienced. Through all these experiences, she has found a clear North Star that guides everything that she does, and she focuses on turning her pain into purpose. She has carved out a global banking and tech career across Australia, USA, and the UK over the past 15 years. She has developed a deep passion for helping others achieve their fullest potential, both professionally and personally. Mel has a keen interest in her own personal growth and development, health and wellness, tennis, running, yoga, and she even is a DJ. She has recently entered the world of podcasting and is so excited to be here to share some of her experiences and hopefully give some hope to those around her. Thank you so much, Mel, for taking the time out to be here with us today. We're excited to have you.
Thank you so much, Brenda. And wow, what an intro. It's a real pleasure to be here.
Well, I was looking at your intro and all the things that you've done, and I was hoping you would give us a little bit of a background on what you've done, maybe starting with your career and then heading into some of the challenges that you have faced.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, it can be really difficult when you're 18 years old, finishing high school, trying to figure out what university degree to study. And for me, I chose quite a broad degree, that being a Bachelor of Commerce, majoring in management and marketing. I'd always really enjoyed leadership in school and was a keen member of the sports teams, as you might guess, based on my hobbies these days. Right. But yeah, I think something that became quite clear to me as I was studying was just how business driven I was and how much I loved that idea of like rallying people around a goal, whether that was a university group project or trying to win a tennis match. And I think that's what really led me to want to start my career in banking, to sort of get my foundations, I suppose, in a huge organization on a graduate scheme. And I would definitely recommend that if we have any sort of younger listeners. Really getting your foot in the door in a graduate program is such a valuable way to experience all different departments of an organization and start to build your network. I think that's such an important thing in your career. And I would say that all of my opportunities sort of from that point, when I launched out of banking after a great few years, but really was looking for something a little bit more innovative and fast paced. And when I was 25, I grew up in Melbourne, but when I was 25, I decided to pack up and move over to the big city, New York City, with 2 suitcases and a head full of dreams. And
that is a huge jump.
Yeah, it was. And I think that's I guess that's a bit of a defining characteristic of my journey is I seem to often place myself outside of my comfort zone. And it doesn't mean that it's not challenging. My poor mum gets panicked calls still to this day about, maybe I've pushed myself a little bit too far in a scary direction. But ultimately, that's where the growth happens. And any sort of, mistakes or trip ups or failures you might make along the way are what ultimately lead you to be successful. So I was, really fortunate to land a great job when I got to New York. And that's when I moved into tech. So I started working in software about 10 years ago when I moved over to America. And I think what I found so exciting and exhilarating after being in such a big corporation was being in, working in Soho in New York and just being able to have the autonomy to really get things done. And all of a sudden, I was this 25-year-old who was managing people and making business decisions and consulting for brands like Apple and Airbnb and Coty and some really exciting businesses. And from that point, I just decided like this is what I want to do. Like I want to work with businesses, consult with them on their marketing strategies or whatever that might grow into based on software companies I might work at, but really have that variety. And I think being someone who just really thrives on building relationships, but really grounding those in, particularly in the business world, in making sure they're mutually beneficial and that both businesses are getting positive results out of that engagement. And I think the one other piece that I really started to feel super passionate about was growing others in their career and starting to lead teams. And that's when I got the opportunity to move over to San Francisco to set up the West Coast office, which was an unexpected pivot in my journey over to London.
Right.
Yeah, because why not just pop over to the West Coast?
Why not? I mean, if you're going to move, go big, right?
Exactly. And you know what? It was a great year. It was unexpected. And initially I was hesitant because it was just, I had stars in my eyes. New York was the dream. But I'm so pleased that I did spend that year in California. I think, being an active person, being able to run the Lake Tahoe half marathon, being able to ski Lake Tahoe and, spend time in nature, being someone, from Australia, that's very much sort of how I grew up, being able to go to the beach or by the bay. And I think that was definitely another experience, being a little bit out of my comfort zone, but certainly one I'm really grateful for. But I'll pause there just for a moment, just to see if you've got any kind of insights or questions on that journey to date.
I grew up in the Bay Area, and so my mind is like, the Bay Area is awesome because there really is so many things to see there, and there are a lot of people, and I think people, when they say California, they say busy, but you get out of the cities and oh my goodness, there's so many amazing things to see in the Bay Area. It was a wonderful place to grow up. So I love that. And having done big moves myself, I actually have done continental moves before, but it is it's a challenge to move, not only, locally, but when you're moving into different cultures, that poses some different challenges as well. So what have you learned from that outside of the box experience?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think being adaptable to change and open-minded is so important. But I think ultimately being authentically yourself is key. I remember when I first moved to America, I really changed the way that I spoke to try and assimilate. And I think there's just some examples like sidewalk, pavement, or the trunk of a car versus the boot of a car. And I remember thinking like, wow, this is almost like trying to learn French or something, and the spelling's different. But I think I actually love, I consider myself to be quite a global citizen. I really thrive in lots of different cities around the world. And what I love is that I've been able to take away the bits that I resonate most with and love the most. And I think something I loved about my time in the US was that go-getter attitude, and that everyone's just like wanting to make the best of themselves, and the pace was unprecedented, almost to the point where I felt like I lived like 5 years in one when I lived in New York.
Wow.
It was nonstop.
Yeah, there are times when I'm like, can we all just slow down? Just take it down a couple notches and enjoy, smell the roses.
2 week pause. And I remember Thanksgiving, when that rolled around after my first year in the US, I was like, oh, everyone actually does stop for these 4 days. This is nice.
Yes, they do. Yep, for
and that is a tradition, actually, to your point, that I have fondly kept with me, even though I've lived in the UK now for the last 7 years. We often do Friendsgiving celebrations over here. And I think that's such a beautiful holiday that, anyone and everyone, no matter what your background, can celebrate.
I love how you've tweaked that to just make it your own. That's fantastic. So so you were in San Francisco, and then did you go to the UK from San Francisco?
You know what? And this is where I suppose love starts to play a role in my story, because when I was in the US, I met a boy that I would date for a couple of years, and he was French. And so, by the time that we met in New York and fell in love, and I was already on my way to move to San Francisco, and he was on his way to move to Champaign in France. And so we did a bit of long distance, and then ultimately I decided that, I was ready for a little bit of a mini sabbatical. I tend to do that between jobs. I tend to take a couple of months to reset and travel for a bit. And
Fantastic.
yeah, that's definitely been a real mind opening and sort of adventure experience that I've been lucky to have over the course of my career. But yeah, I actually went to Champagne for a few months, and it didn't work out with the Frenchman. But I decided that I loved being in the sort of EMEA Europe area, and that was right around the time pre-Brexit. But then Brexit did happen like quite shortly afterwards, and I think London is a pretty easy transition as an Australian, being part of the Commonwealth. We get a working holiday visa. I would definitely, if there are any Australian listeners or Commonwealth listeners who are under 35, like recommend that working holiday visa, because it gives you that option to move to a country for 2 or 3 years and not be bound by a sponsorship visa from another company. And I actually did find that to be, just a challenging aspect of working in the US, because at any point, you're sort of at the mercy of your employer to whether you can stay in the country or not.
And if you don't have that job, you're gone, right?
Exactly. And
wow.
then it's
that's like an underlying stress, right?
It was a little bit.
I never even thought about that. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I would say it's sort of things became a little bit more relaxed when I settled into the UK, and I didn't really expect to necessarily stay beyond a couple of years. But I think once you start to build your communities around you, and I think also the UK is quite culturally aligned to Australia, a little bit colder, a little bit less sort of seaside in close proximity. But I think the thing I love about London, where I still reside and very much call home, is that there's just as much opportunity as there is in a city like New York, but it's a little bit more sustainable. It's a little bit more spread out. There are so many parks, and it might take a little bit longer to get to a neighborhood to see your friend. But I think that just gives me a little bit more peace of mind that the pace is ever so slightly slower. And you've also got Europe on your doorstep. So it's pretty hard to say no to a work trip to Milan or Paris.
Yeah. I know. I took a trip over to Italy this fall, and
amazing.
It was just an amazing trip. But one of the things that really struck me was just how small the countries are. Having lived almost my whole life inside the US, it's like when I went out, I went to Brazil. And so that was like just as big, right? And so to go to Europe, where Italy is smaller than California, like it blows my mind. Like they have their own language and culture, and it blows my mind, and then you've got all of these other countries like that. So yeah, I mean, just an amazing place to be. That's super cool.
Totally. And I think, you hit the nail on the head. I think you have 4 or so different time zones in the US alone, and we're all kind of on the same time zone. I mean, Europe has one and we have one, and it's so culturally rich. To spend, even if it's just a few weeks, you can get so much out of it, let alone maybe, if you could spend a year living abroad. Like, I think, this part of the world is such a fantastic place to do it for weekend trips and just broadening your horizons. I think when you're in a new country or a new city, you start to see things from different perspectives. And I think that's so important to being a well-rounded person. And it keeps things exciting too, trying to learn a little bit of French or Italian and keep your mind fresh.
That's awesome. I love that. And I love the experiences that you've had. Now, those aren't the only ones that you have, though. So I'm going to ask you to go a little bit deeper, because I know that this is part of your story. So we talked a little bit about some of the challenges that you've had. Can you explain some of those so that we can get an idea of like the whole you?
Yeah, absolutely. I think for me, I'll start with a career challenge, and then would love to dive into some more personal ones. But I think while we're kind of still on the theme of career, I think something that I really struggle with, particularly when I'm early on in a company, is imposter syndrome and but also perfectionism. And there's this people pleasing sort of little girl in me who has always wanted to do the right thing and fears I suppose, getting in trouble for, not that I really do get in trouble, but it's more just that, I think a lot of us, certainly as they, try and raise these topics with friends and normalize the conversation a little bit. But I think a lot of us are so hard on ourselves, and particularly as women, to get it perfectly right, and to maybe compromise on our own boundaries, and give more than really what we should be giving to our career. And I don't have children, but in particular, I know many mothers find that so difficult and struggle with those different identities. And I think it can be it can be really crippling. And I certainly have suffered with anxiety, like sort of medically diagnosed generalized anxiety disorder at different times in my life more than others. And I would say that certainly in my career, there have been a few phases where it has impacted my ability to do my best in the role. And I think a lot of that, unfortunately, is sort of me being my own worst enemy and letting that demon get the better of me, that inner critic.
Right.
That and I think I struggled with that on and off for a number of years. And I think it's only sort of since actually sort of reached a breaking point and hit burnout in my previous company. And that's what led me to take a couple of months off this past summer and really change the way I live, and kind of implement a completely new lifestyle around health and wellness, and really looking after my mind in new ways. But I think we shouldn't necessarily need to get to that point where we are medically incapacitated, and unable to sort of function in the world. And I think so much of that pressure can come from ourselves. And I think I'm really trying to I think an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And I think the more that you can prevent and just have your habits and routines in place, and stick to those around, sleep. Sleep is one that I actually have always on and off had struggles with. I don't know if you can relate to that at all.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. But I'm curious, with having to deal with imposter syndrome and perfectionism and the anxiety, do you think all of those were exacerbated by pursuing top level positions in businesses? Because there does seem to be added pressure to that. So was it like that for you? I mean, that's, at least in my own experience, because you are leading other people and you've got to set a bar and all that stuff. So do you feel like pursuing a career at a top level where the pace is so much higher, do you think that exacerbated that, or do you think it would have been like that no matter what? And I'm not saying that was a bad choice or anything. I'm just curious what the dynamics of that were.
Yeah, I think honestly for me, it's no matter what. I think I could be, I'm whether I'm doing something around the house, like I'll criticize myself for, like, that will be my sort of default position, that sort of like beating myself up. And I think the interesting thing is, like, I think the more we can try to help lift others up and help them see themselves from another perspective. I've always had that feedback right from the beginning of my career, even when I was very junior. Believe in yourself, like you can do it. And I think it's a lifelong quest to actually become that and really sort of feel like that, you've got that inner confidence. And I do think it can be easy to crave that validation from others and sort of external sources, but really coming back to yourself. And I think that a big part of that is liking who you are and being proud of who you are, and having that relationship with yourself. So yeah, I think I don't probably help myself by pursuing these big jobs with big targets and big teams, but I think I also get so much enjoyment out of that on the flip side. And I love the sort of opportunities it's afforded me to live all over the world and travel all over the world and live a really just a really nice lifestyle. But it's trade-offs, isn't it?
That it really is, but and sometimes I feel like, everything has an opposite, right? And so
Mm,
like the greater the pain that you feel, also the more capacity for joy that you have because
yes.
of that. And so I mean, I honestly admire you for going big, even though you've got I honestly feel like some of the bravest people in the world are those who deal with anxiety and depression and show up anyway, you know,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
it's I think they're just amazing people.
And you know what? And yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think more recently I've started to learn some of the benefits of having anxiety, and even I did struggle a little bit with alcohol consumption in my past, and I think the flip side of things like addiction and anxiety is huge capacity for creativity, and it's like a mind that actually is so busy that can produce so much that sometimes you just feel you need an escape from, and there's a lot of beauty in the world because of people who have minds like that. If you think about all of the art and creativity out there,
For
and
sure.
some of that sort of yeah, more thought provoking types of content we consume, and art that we view, and films that we go and see that entertain us. I think music's a great example, and a hobby of mine that you touched on is so many songs that I love the lyrics of actually are artists sharing their pain with the world and making it
Hmm.
beautiful. And so that's, I suppose, I've started more recently this year, really, when I've gone on this journey to become the truest and most authentic and best version of myself, to really start to see the beauty in the pain.
I really love how you're seeing the benefits of a challenge, right? I mean, it's so I've got a daughter who's very empathic, and for years and years, she has felt like it was this massive burden. And
Mm,
I've always thought, my gosh, what an amazing gift, but I don't know
yeah.
what that feels like to her. And so she's just recently starting to see some benefits to it. And I agree with you. I think when you have a challenge like that and you can see what you've learned from it or how you've grown from it or just
Hmm.
additional capabilities that you have because of that challenge, wow, that puts it in a whole different perspective. Like that's really
Yeah.
beautiful. I love that.
Yeah, you can start to actually you can take the gift from it and be really grateful for it. And I think by no means does it mean it's always easy, but I think the more we can practice gratitude and mindfulness, and I think journaling has really helped me a lot in getting to the root of understanding maybe why some of these behaviors surface, and uh, yeah, why I talk to myself in certain ways. And it's like if you just unpack that a little bit and explore it more and let yourself be free to create and to play and to have fun
Yes.
with it. Yeah, I think that's where a lot of the untapped beauty kind of lies within.
I agree. I Playing is something that I have struggled with because I get so focused on what I'm trying to do that I now I've even go, okay, well, how can I gamify and play with what I'm working on now, because I think we forget as women, we just go, 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 go. And sometimes we do stop or don't
Hmm.
stop to really just enjoy life.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, as someone who previously probably lent more into unhealthy coping mechanisms than I really probably should have, or I didn't necessarily know better at the time, but now I realize actually the best kind of dopamine and escape is dancing and going to an ecstatic dance class, putting on some amazing music, getting a massage, taking care of yourself, going on a huge walk or a run. And there's nothing better than the natural real endorphins that you can get from a lot of that stuff that is not necessarily it's not the easy option, but I think what I've realized is there are no shortcuts to success.
Boy, and you know what? When you learn that, like it's just because
Yeah.
I think we always like go for like what's the fastest, easiest way, but that's not always
Totally.
the best. So you've
No.
mentioned twice now, going into a little bit of substance abuse. Can you talk a little bit
Hmm.
about that, how you fell into that trap, And then how did you get out? Because sometimes that's really tough for people to get out of that situation.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it probably comes back to like there were always little patches over the course of my 20s that where I would probably just take it a little bit too far, but I wouldn't have called it like a fully fledged addiction to
Right.
alcohol at the time. It was probably just going a little bit harder than some of my friends and maybe saying things and doing things I wasn't that proud of. And I think, it all began with wanting to kind of just feel relaxed because it was that anxiety that I was feeling. And I remember when I
Right.
first started drinking alcohol, I was like, oh, I can just, have a
Right.
sigh of relief and finally just relax a bit. And I guess what it also allowed me to do was to sort of, I could shape shift to sort of fit the version of
Mm.
what I thought other people wanted me to be. And that would sort of become a pattern in my romantic relationships. And I suppose it was, my therapist called it the red shoe, like performing and
Right.
thinking that I needed to be larger than life because I was maybe just a little bit uncomfortable in the skin I was in and a little bit awkward. And I think that's another thing that can come with having anxiety is that you can feel really awkward in some scenarios, and that's also just being human. And it was again, yeah, it was sort of a bit of a quick fix. And I would say my abuse of alcohol or my relationship with alcohol really sort of hit rock bottom around the time that I got married in the pandemic. And that relationship wasn't particularly healthy. It wasn't a particularly great dynamic, and I suppose it didn't make either of us a better version of ourselves. And I think that's really what you want. And, you want to be with someone who you can be comfortable with, who you can be relaxed around, who you can be your authentic self with. And that marriage wasn't that. And so, sort of in the relationship, we would drink a lot, I suppose, to medicate and be able to, as a social lubricant, be able to communicate because communication was a challenge in that relationship. And I think really when it got to the point where the only option was to separate and ultimately divorce, that's kind of where I hit a bit of a rock bottom, and that's
Yeah.
where it all sunk in, and I was like, well, that was sort of the biggest. I mean, I'll call it a failure. I think, failures are beautiful and they are what define us and help us succeed in the future. But that I let myself just go a little bit out of control. And that's kind of when the solo drinking behind closed doors happened for a fairly, brief period of time. But it was a really dark, sad time. And I was in pain and I was trying to numb that pain. And I think that was the point, a couple of years ago where it was like drinking was no longer fun. It was, a medication to
Right.
not have to be in pain and to not have to sort of be sitting with myself. I couldn't just sort of sit with myself. And yeah, I think that was really tough. And I was fortunate to have great support around me. And, a few friends did intervene at certain points. And at those times, I wasn't necessarily ready. And I do think with any type of addiction or abusive relationship with any substance, it's ultimately like you've got to want to make the change.
For
And
sure.
that was, yeah, I think, yeah, sort of early this year, I just decided, I realized my life was going that way. And I very much wanted to be able to fulfill my potential. And for me, yeah, it did take having some meetings with my GP and my therapists and sort of working with my family and really opening up about just how bad things had gotten. And yeah, really moving on to a path of sobriety with the support of my loved ones and, medical professionals and therapy. And I honestly haven't looked back. I think you just
I
have so
love
many
that.
more hours in the day, days in the week. Yeah, I don't actually really think about it at all much. I think I think it takes a little bit of time to get used to, but I like sober me so much more than drunk me. And I'm not sort of
Oh, I
nervous
love
about
that
going
so
out.
much. So you
I'm not
said
nervous
something in
about
there
what I'll
that
do.
really intrigued me because I think anytime that and I'll speak for myself because I have found that when I'm really struggling with something, if I'm holding it all in and I'm just, ruminating and I'm not sharing that it just
Mm-hmm.
goes worse and worse for me. And it sounds like
Mm-hmm.
you were similar in that way because you said
Mm-hmm.
how communicating and really telling people what you were going through helped you. Can you speak a little bit about the importance of communication when you're
Mm-hmm.
struggling?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it can be so hard for anyone to know what to say or what to do, particularly if you've been a bit closed off and maybe they've
Right.
offered to help and it wasn't the right time yet. And I think it was really scary at first to communicate, to call my parents and say, like, had I realize now I've had an issue with how I've been dealing with my life and how I've
Right.
been trying to push down the pain, and actually everything's just getting more and more painful and out of control. And it was sort of just my life felt out of control. And I wasn't happy with who I'd become. And so that I was really fortunate that, like, even though I had been perhaps not a consistent friend who was showing up as healthy Mel would for some of my friends, I'm so fortunate that some important people in my life really stuck with me and persisted. And even though I might have made mistakes, and I think that we call it chosen family, particularly living abroad, because
Yes.
I don't have my mum and dad, and thankfully my brother lives in Berlin, but that no one's in the same city as me, and so luckily I had people who felt like family. My even my boss at my job at the time was. Yeah, she could see my decline. I think maybe when you're in the addiction, you don't realize how unhealthy you look and you come across, and
Yeah.
others around you start to see that deterioration. And it yeah, I think that being able to ask for help. And I will actually also say that my GP here in London, in the NHS, the sort of the free healthcare service, she's been incredible. And so just sort of having safe spaces too that maybe weren't friends and family initially, while I was trying to just become comfortable with where I was at on my own. Sort of having those confidential outlets were critical. I think I had like three therapists at a point in time.
Wow. That's awesome.
Yeah,
Well,
and
and
then
it's
we
hard,
really.
it's hard to admit to yourself, like when
Mm,
I dealt with depression for several years, but I never
mm,
believed until the very end that I had depression because that
mm,
wasn't how I identified myself. And so it can be really hard to say, oh, this is what I've become,
yeah,
this is, I am somebody now who I really am not internally, if that makes sense.
yeah,
So,
yeah.
but having that frank conversation with yourself is probably the hardest.
Yes, exactly. And saying, I admit I am powerless over whatever is going on, or that my life is out of control. That is, I thought that would be the moment that was rock bottom, but actually that was the first step towards getting better.
Oh, I
And
love that. Yes, it is. Mm-hmm.
I remember being so nervous to call my mum and say, and, there's a little bit of alcoholism in my family. Her father was an alcoholic and died, and because of that, and also didn't ever have a good relationship because of that. And I always had in the back of my mind, like, I don't want her to have to go through that with her father and her brother, actually, and then her daughter. Like,
Right.
that's not how I want this to go. And I guess it's interesting. Again, I didn't realize how much people could really see how bad this was, because I was like, oh, but I'm hiding it. I'm kind of
Right.
secretly drinking. Like, no
Right.
one will know. And of course, people, yeah, again, like they're smart. They know you, and they know that you're not really yourself, particularly because mine was quite compressed in really, a year, 1 to 2 years, really 1 year where it was quite bad. And yeah, and I just remember how proud they were. My parents were so supportive, so proud, and every
I
single
love that.
friend who I've really, been vulnerable with about it has been nothing but supportive. And if they're not, then they're obviously not the right people to have around you in that next phase. And you've got to
Right.
really prioritize yourself when you're kind of in the early stages of recovery.
I love that. And just the value of having a supportive community around you. And
Mm,
and it doesn't matter if there are blood relatives or chosen
Mm,
relatives, right?
exactly.
It's because ultimately you get to choose who
Mm,
enters that space around you, and yeah, I mean, if you've got a supportive network, like it makes all the difference in the world.
exactly. And I would also say like there are so many, I don't know so much about in the US, but in the UK, and I imagine it would be the case in the US, but there are so many free resources
Oh,
available.
for
Like I think
sure.
a lot of like it's amazing. And I think you've just got to be ready. Like you've got to kind of say, like, I am not achieving my potential in life. We only get one life. It's flying by. We're not getting any younger. And unfortunately, with addiction, like it's like you're on an elevator or in a lift, and the only way it goes is down, and it just gets worse.
Right.
So the sooner you can kind of get off that lift, if it gets that bad for you, then that's that's ultimately the goal, to try and kind of
Yeah.
move in a healthier direction. Yeah.
Well, and really I think it's Alcoholics Anonymous who, the first
Mm,
thing is admitting, right? And that really
yes.
is the door that opens up hope,
Yes.
and that's
Yeah.
how it was for me. It's like, oh, okay, this is what I'm dealing with. This is
Yeah.
who I've become, and do I want to stay that way? And if not, I'd better do something about it.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly. And I think you realize, like, when you're on the other side of it, and I by no means judge anyone who drinks at all. Like, I just very much, think it's up to everyone to decide
for
what they
sure.
put in their body. But so I don't want to come across as like preachy or anything, but I think the more you kind of realize it's actually a poisonous substance, and it's a very harmful drug. And even the way like my skin and my hair and everything's bounced back the more and more months I have into sobriety is
That's
it's
fascinating.
crazy to think. And like my body and everything, just and my mind and energy and sleep and so many, and the quality of my connections. I think that even 1 week into sobriety, I remember thinking, oh my goodness, okay, I'm already starting to feel the benefits. And I think sometimes something that makes it hard to think about taking those steps, if that's a direction you think you want to go in for your health, or that you need to go in, is, oh, but it's going to take so long to feel the good things. It's going to be so
Right.
difficult for a long time. But actually, with the right support, and don't get me wrong, I was climbing the walls at times, and I was having to leave events really early and just do what I needed to do to get through it. But yeah, it actually it didn't take that long to really start to feel some pretty great benefits, because it's such a destructive drug, especially if you're having any more than like a glass of wine with dinner. Like it's really harmful to you, and it's more and more, it's rising in all the countries that I've lived in, certainly. But I think it's in the US. I was listening to a podcast the other day that it deaths by causes of either alcohol addiction or suicide, which is often a result of those sorts of issues, are rising 30% year over year, whereas cancer's rising 3% year over year. And
That amazing.
it's crazy. And
Yeah.
a lot of people are waking up to the effects of just how bad drinking in excess, or even daily having one, can be. And I think there's really, it's a good time to sort of be sober, because there's such a sober curious movement, and I think there's a lot of respect that comes with it. And there are more and more great non-alcoholic drink options. I know we spoke about this when we caught up recently,
Yes.
and that's certainly an idea that I would love to pursue, and kind of explore that space to potentially move into it in the future. But it's, yeah, I think there's actually so many other ways you can enjoy, a drink that's non-alcoholic on a night out or at a dinner, that's actually even more delicious, because
Right.
you're going to wake up clear-headed. You're drinking for future you.
Well, and I think the key is to know, and this is something that I would tell myself because I'm um really, really love cookies and like sugary things,
Me
and
too.
I was really trying to like separate myself from all of that, because we all have our Achilles heel, right? Um
Totally. We're
and
human.
I just felt like I learned I have a choice every day in every situation. I have a choice, and I'm the one who gets to choose.
Yes.
And when you're able to take that, I mean, that's power right there,
Yes.
is feeling like you have the capability to
Yes.
make a choice. And so I love that you were able to see something about yourself that you wanted to change and you went after it. I kind of feel like that's just kind of who you are. It seems like you see something and you go for it, right?
Yeah,
And
I seem
so
to
I
have
love
loved
that.
to have totally. I love to take I guess the road less traveled or the slightly more difficult path if you were to be given the options. But I think that's just my journey, and I wouldn't change it at all. And I think all of the people I've met along the way and the lessons I've learned are absolutely worth their weight in gold. And I also I wouldn't change anything about my past and any of those dark times, because out of, you need the darkness to be able to see
You
the
do.
light. And
You really do.
yeah.
So
And
how have you taken all of these moments of pain and
mhm.
turned them into purpose?
Yeah, I think certainly, well, today's a good example. I'm so passionate about, I think I what got me also out of some of my darkest moments was hearing other people's stories. I was listening to so
Mm,
many podcasts, I was reading so many books, and that was even when I was still kind of in a bit of a dark place with addiction, but I knew I wanted to get out. I just hadn't been able to do it yet. And so I was kind of building my path towards exiting that phase of my life.
right.
And I think for me, even if one person listening to this gets one little nugget of hope out of anything that we're talking about today, then that is turning pain into purpose. And I think there's, I suppose a number of ways. Like for me, something that maybe sounds trivial, but it was one of my biggest fears going sober, is like I love socializing. I don't want to stop going out and dancing, but I don't want the social pressure of like, oh, why aren't you drinking? Or just have one
Right.
shot. Or I don't necessarily want to have to explain my story to a big group of, my friends at the tennis club or whatever it may be. And so I decided that's why I decided to pursue DJing, was so I could have a purpose when I was kind of
Oh, I
out and
love
about, and
that.
I could
Right.
bring energy and kind of have that joy. And still, I still love going and chatting to people as well. But I think it's been an amazing sort of transformation of how I experience nights out, because I feel really respected and you feel like you're really contributing. And I would say the endorphin rushes and the dopamine high was greater than anything that alcohol would give me, because it was like, oh my gosh, I'm actually contributing and I've learned something. And that's what, I suppose that's what that growth really feels like. And it hasn't been easy. Like, it's been a lot of lessons at the London Sound Academy over the summer, and I'm still very much a beginner and making mistakes. But I think, just getting some little opportunities here and there, and having fun with it, and realizing like that's one example of how I can turn something that was really painful and awkward, and I was like, I'm never going to go out and be fun again,
Right.
into, no, actually I can be, and in an entirely different way, and in a different sort of stratosphere than how it was before. Because I used to be the one stumbling around, a bit too drunk by the end of the night on the
Hmm.
dance floor. And now I can walk away, feeling like I really respect myself, and that I've been able to help provide, a fun time for people I love,
Oh my
and
goodness.
myself.
I love that so much. And and something that I notice, when you're going through a change like that,
Mm,
everybody expects you to be the same, right? Which is where
yes.
you're going with the being with your friends. And yet,
Mm,
if you take a stand and you go, well, and this is how I'm going to make it different, like there's far more respect that comes from that,
yes. Yeah.
rather than just conforming. I love that you totally didn't give up on your dream of being out and about and
Yeah.
connected. You just found
Yes.
a different way to connect. So
Yes.
and I think
Yes.
that's so valuable. That's such good advice. I love that so much.
I thank you, Brenda. And I think, for me, the opposite of addiction is connection. And I don't know if I
Yes.
heard that in an AA meeting or if it was somewhere else, but it's so true. Like, the
Hmm.
depth of my connections, my existing connections, have only expanded and deepened, and in such, respectful, beautiful, dependable, reliable ways. Like, I sort of feel like, I'm single at the moment, so I don't necessarily have that support from a partner, but I feel like I've got this solar system of, different people who I can really rely on and who can rely on me. And I think that the other piece would just be the great new people that you bring and attract into your life, who maybe are also in recovery, or maybe they're not, and they're just people who respect the you that's showing up in the world that you wouldn't have met otherwise, and who are kind of really helping, this being a great example, like really helping expand each other on our journeys. And I think that's really what I'm all about, and where I sort of want to take my life is to make sure I'm, having fun along the way, but achieving my potential. I think I was not achieving my potential, when I was in the grips of my addiction. And I think there's so much out there to explore and to give, and turn pain into purpose, but also, continue to grow and thrive as a result, individually, of all you've been through, and how much depth of character you can develop, and how much compassion you can have for others, and, really, really hear them and see them when someone else is going through something, and be a sort of source of wisdom that through all of those experiences.
Oh my goodness. Well, I think I could talk for 3 more hours minimum.
Yeah, me too.
I know, I honestly, like, you're in the UK and I'm in the US, and I'm like, oh, there's too big of an ocean and land between us.
I know. Well, you know what? I'm coming to the US for work in January, so maybe we'll be able to tee up a time. I know it's a very big country.
That would be super fun. I would really, really love to meet you in person. This was just absolutely lovely. I so admire you for going after what you want, not only in your career, but who you want to be as a person, and how you want to show up in this world. It's just very admirable, and it takes a lot of work. I think people oftentimes we look at another person and we go, oh, it's got to be so easy to be that person.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
And it just isn't. It just is not. It takes work to show up in the world in a way in which that's authentic to you. But it's so worth it. So worth it.
Well, thank you so much for having me on, Brenda. Saying back to you, it's a pleasure to, have learned a little bit more about your journey, and thank you so much for this opportunity. And I've loved our conversation. So thank you for, starting this podcast. I think it's such an inspiring platform to be able to share with others.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate that. And we will have to do it again another time.
Yes,
so thank you. I appreciate it. So, before we go, I wanted to let all of our listeners know, if they want to contact you, how can they do that? And I will put that in the show notes.
Yes. So on Instagram, or I would be happy to share my email. Instagram's probably easier. But I will, at Melon Ball Biscuit, and I'm very happy to share my email as well. So I will pop that over to you.
I'm going to say that slowly: Melon Ball Biscuit, right?
You know what? Yes. And so that was actually, I used to nanny these kids when I was in uni, and they would call me Melon Ball, and Mel was taken on Instagram, so it became my brand. So please, I love, I'm not necessarily super active in what I post, but I love to connect with other like-minded people. And send me a DM if there's anything you've heard today that resonated. I'd love to chat.
I love that. Well, and I do hope that our listeners got something out of this conversation, and just hope is there. I think that's the ultimate message. Hope is there,
always.
And it is possible to be who you were meant to be. And I hope everybody listening remembers that. So thank you very much, Melissa. And for those who are listening, remember that your purpose is in your story. You can find it. It's there always, because you are you. And until next time, take care. Bye.
Celebrate your dreams. Let them take flight for you.